I call to order the June 24th, 2019 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Present.
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mrs. Bowers?
Present.
Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Messer?
Present.
Mr. Morosky?
Here.
President Jones?
Here. Thank you. I need a motion to revise the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now I need a motion for a 48-hour waiver to waive the usual requirement for resolutions to be heard first in committee.
So moved. Second.
Okay. It's been motioned and seconded. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
No.
Mrs. Bowers?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Thank you. I need a motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting, June 19th, 2019.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved as presented. Mrs. Bolton, please present the June 20th, 2019 committee meeting report.
Thank you very much. Yes, I want to thank staff for being able to get this to the board in the board packet because parts of it are quite relevant to our discussion this evening. So again, thanks to staff, and thanks also to staff in a kind of a preemptive way on the work that was done on the calendar that's also being presented tonight. We had a wonderful finance meeting. We got the first briefing, if you will, from our government liaison folks, Mr. Kearney and Mr. Glover. But most importantly, I think if you'll notice, we talked at length about what were the target items and issues that needed to be addressed, and I think all members of the Finance Committee contributed, and I think that's a pretty good list for both the administration and the liaison folks to be working through, and you can see some of that pertains, as you know, to preschool and capital improvements and a few other items as well. Then we determined after activities beyond the classroom brought back information that was requested by Mr. Messer and Ms. Bates. They had a board member of theirs come back with Mr. Leshner and present the information. It was very impressive. Information regarding the services that they render and the growth that has been seen through ABC. And it was determined that we would be recommending that moving ahead, they would be getting an okay for a 5-year contract instead of a 3-year contract. And also, I think Mr. Messer was very wise in suggesting that we really need to make more publicly of the efforts of the ABC folks so that the community is aware of their contribution to our children and to our staff. We had an update from the treasurer and also from the property tax working committee or group because our treasurer did a presentation to that group that's investigating property taxes and more particularly how to stabilize neighborhoods and how possibly to find ways to allow people to kind of remain in their homes and properties, particularly those that are elderly, as the property taxes increase and is forcing many people to move or to at least offer their property for sale. Had an extensive report from the Preschool Promise folks that is outlined in the minutes, and was really glad to see the interim director, Sally Westheimer, there to help us kind of not only know what's going on now and for us to express some issues, but also she and the treasurer Wagner allowed us to see some of the seeds that they're planting for some future decisions that the board will need to be making. And then we did review policies and sent some to policy committee, and some we'd already dealt with, and one is going to the audit committee. And then we had the most extensive part of our meeting, as you know, on the minutes, and the reason it was important to get this compiled and to you by Friday, in Friday's packet. We did a pretty much line by line, blow by blow of the discussion that we had as a group and finance committee at your direction, the board's direction, to investigate having an agreement or not having an agreement, and the kinds of things that should go into the resolution that we're prepared to work on tonight. And so I was very appreciative of Mr. Driehaus's influence and information. And then we also had a brief, close to information only, a brief presentation regarding what the treasurer usually presents to us, the monthly updates as well as the CRAs. And when we lost quorum, according to our policy and parliamentary procedure, it was just a sharing of the information so that you all would have the information in your packets, but no action was taken. Submit and hope for approval.
Thank you. Do board members have questions or comments about the report? I need a motion to approve the committee report. So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved as presented. Superintendent Mitchell, please present the presentations.
Yes, I would like to ask our Director for Food Service, Jessica Shelley, to come forward. She needs to make a short presentation that is according to Ohio Revised Code 3313.814. So this is something that we are... Food Service, Jessica Shelley, to come forward. She needs to make a short presentation that is according to Ohio Revised Code 3313.814.
Less than 5 minutes of your time today to go over.
So this is something that we are... Food Service, Jessica Shelley, to come forward. She needs to make a short presentation that is according to Ohio Revised Code 3313.814.
Less than 5 minutes of your time today to go over.
So this is something that we are... Food Service, Jessica Shelley, to come forward.
Public meeting to answer any questions that may be about the policy and how it is enacted in CPS. Essentially what they have is a standard for all food and beverages that are sold outside of school meals. These are meals and beverages and snacks that are not part of the USDA reimbursable program, but items that might be used for fundraisers or other kinds of events. And what it says is that we are in compliance with this Ohio Revised Code that does not allow food to be sold during the school day, before the school day, or up to 30 minutes after the end of the extended school day. It also says that we're in compliance with our wellness policy, that we are, the standards don't apply during non-school hours, on weekends, or at sporting events, and that all of our fundraising that does occur during the school day or after the school day encourages and supports lifelong wellness practices. The final one is a component about the sale and consumption. And again, it just stipulates that in our wellness policy, we have to be exact in terms of when these food items can be sold outside of our regular NSLP USDA programs. It does also stipulate that food sales to staff and to students are at the discretion of each school's wellness committee. So if a particular school wellness committee would choose to have nutrition standards around those foods, they can, but there is not a policy in place through the USDA that requires it. The third component is the vending machine and school store policy compliance. It says, again, that the policy doesn't just extend to fundraisers, it also extends to vending machines and school stores. And again, we have an attestation from every principal that we are in compliance with this part of our wellness policy and the ORC. That's it.
Wow. Do board members have questions or comments for Ms. Shelley? That must mean you're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Infinite trust.
Yes. Thank you. Superintendent, please introduce the next presentation.
Gladly. So the treasurer and I will step down to the podium in which we're going to talk about the budget. But we know that the budget is tied to the board's priorities and initiatives, and so we're going to lead our conversation there. All right. So as we've been doing our work with the administration as well as with the board finance committee, we've always kept in our mind the board's strategic goals in terms of the 5 large areas. And so you'll see the beginning of the presentation will begin off with identifying those things that we are funding that relate directly to the board's goals as it relates to great people, communities, systems, learning environments, and choices. And we'll also show you what that translates into as it relates to the board's priorities for the new strategic plan. So here are the priorities identified by the board for the upcoming strategic plan in terms of community engagement, growth, student-centered decision-making, creating better systems, and safety and security. And so our treasurer will outline in a document for you so that you'll be able to see how our investments that we're proposing tonight directly support the board's vision. Great people, you'll see that we have a strong focus on professional development, talent acquisition, as well as providing mentorship for our teachers, considering the fact that we have a large volume of teachers who have 5 or fewer years of experience, as well as really focusing on the employee experience. To dramatically improve the academic achievement, we know we must also improve the experience for our employees, who will improve it for our families and our students. We continue with the great people, and you will see that we have a special emphasis on minority recruitment, which has been outlined as an area of interest for the board for quite some time, and so we'll continue to focus on this area, as well as staffing shortages and positive school culture and student teaching, as well as co-teaching. In terms of great communities, we realize and recognize how much the board truly values communities, and not just communities, but neighborhoods. And so you can see the investments that we'll be making for the upcoming school year as it relates to communities and their engagement with our district. And then systems. We believe that our systems are foundational in terms of providing the landscape that's needed for us to really enter into a new strategic plan. And so we've really focused on continuous improvement, as well as some transformations as it relates to transportation, and obviously the new strategic plan. Great learning environments. We're doing all of these things up front to impact the learning environments for our young people, preschool through grade 12, and quite honestly, we're also measuring in terms of their experience beyond. Are we setting them up for success through My Tomorrow, from preschool entry to kindergarten readiness to going into the world of work, into college or some form of schooling, or into the military? Continuing with environments, we know and recognize that safety is our #1 priority. And then also, we are really recognizing the value of extra and co-curricular activities, fine arts clubs, as well as athletics. And then great learning choices. One of the ways we believe that Cincinnati is becoming a place of destination is because of our school district. We are smack dab in the middle of a destination district and a destination city, in terms of we have lots of choices for families to be able to choose from, with a variety of programming. And so with our Vision 2020 schools, with opening 3 new schools year before last and 2 next year, we are offering great learning choices, and we're funding those items. So now that everyone is able to see the specific strategic direction as laid out by the board, our treasurer will speak to how we're thinking about being able to fund the board's initiatives.
So good evening. First I'm going to talk to you a little bit about process, just to remind you that the process for creating an annual general operating budget starts in October of the previous year. It usually starts with our 5-year forecast and with our student projections, so we have something to base our staffing and formulas on. And so we started with a $635 million target for next year. So we typically start off with that information. The board sets their strategic goals for the year through your retreat. The performance leadership team works with the superintendent and the treasurer to formulate what the annual scope of those objectives are going to be. And then the schools take over and the central office take over to personalize their budgets to meet those needs. All along, walking beside us is the budget commission. We meet monthly during the budget season. And then, of course, we held 2 public hearings this year. So here's a timeline of the activities, just to show the difference responsibilities between the board, the administration, and then the budget commission. And we are now at the very end of that process, thankfully. So when it comes to the schools, they initially receive their staffing allocations based on student projections and formulas that are defined by our collective bargaining agreements, state or federal law. And then they start talking about what their PE art music allocations will look like. And then this year we had a new process. We'll go into a little bit more detail on the new equity process. They also, in their second step, we give them a non-personnel per pupil allocation for the number of students in their building. And the instructional leadership team decides how that money gets spent across their non-personnel line items. And then the role of the LSDMC is to approve that budget before it comes back to the central office for consolidation. And then they are responsible for monitoring the spend as it goes. So here's some examples of the formulas that drive our staffing based off of student projections. And so we use our class size limits from the collective bargaining agreement. Our PE art music allocations they get 1 body for every 7 load-bearing teachers, and they decide they have to use all PE art music, but then they can decide if they want 2 PEs and 3 musics and 1 art. They're also giving an overload paraprofessionals based on the collective bargaining agreement staffing, an operational para to help them with bus duty, lunch duty, before and after school, and then some programs require extra paraprofessionals. So I won't read them all, but you can just see the examples of those formulas. And then centrally, we allocate special education staff and English language learning staff, the in-school suspension, security, and counseling. So as a result of our continuous improvement process efforts, we created a team last year that was made up mostly of school principals and the budget staff to come up with what worked well, what didn't work well, and what was born out of that was the equity process. Because they said the formulas make it equal but not equitable. And so every school has their own personality of population and their needs are different, and so they needed a way to fund those needs. And so I was racking my brain trying to come up with this really fancy formula, and Laura just said, Jen, why don't we just ask them? So I was like, it's beautiful in its simplicity. So the month of December, the schools formed their teams. They analyzed their data, their one plan, the Title I plan, and decided what they wanted to spend money on that would help them be successful. And so they submitted that to the performance leadership team with measures. They had to be very specific about whether they were going to be adding tutoring for math because they had a weakness in 3rd grade math, for example. And so the performance leadership team spent 2 full days together and analyzed every school's request. And then we added the things that got approved, we added them to the school budget. We have a special cost center coding system where we can track how much money we put into equity and then look at the results that they said they were going to move. And so I'm really anxious to see what that looks like at the end of next year. So this was the result of the equity process. We ended up adding $4.3 million to the school budgets, majority of that being on tutors for reading and math. We added some teachers, some social workers, and some paraprofessionals, among some other non-personnel, some software that they wanted, and other resources. So in addition to this new budget process for the equity process, we actually introduced a new budget development tool to the schools in the central office. That was off of OpenGov. They actually built it based on our recommendations. We're going to have an income revenue sharing partnership as they go out and sell this to other districts. But we create all of our student formulas, our staffing formulas into the system. We drop in the student projections, and it just kicks out what their base allocation is. Then they layer on top of that or their equity request, and then anything that the district centrally assigns, like the in-school suspension paras, the counselors, and security assistants. And then they get to allocate their non-personnel. It's a web-based system. The beauty of it is, and you're going to see this a little bit later in some charts, is that I can actually do some analytics on the budget while we're building it, rather than waiting until after you approve it, gets loaded into our financial system, and then I get to do the analytics. Most of the feedback was pretty positive. We tripped a little bit with our training, but we're learning, so we're moving on. And then we actually introduced yet another new process with when we started the central office budgets, and so the superintendent's going to kind of share that.
Thank you. So as we were doing our planning around the budget process for central office, we wanted to look at a matrix model to identify not just new costs or new things we wanted to fund, but also existing, to identify which things were high impact and low cost, and which things were high impact and high cost. And you can see that we really wanted to make sure that all the dollars we were spending, we could show a return on investment. And I'll say this again, in the words of Sarah Trumbull Oliver, we are not a mom and pop shop. We are close to $1 billion business, and so we need to be able to take stock of the return on investment. And so that's what we did. This is what it looked like. So we had a huge chart, and we laid it out where we took all the major things that we fund, and we put them on Post-its with a dollar value, and we put them in quadrants to identify those things that we would stop funding and where we would reallocate money to other places to have high impact. And we really did challenge each other's thinking during this work. We are now tying that to the priorities outlined by the board and goals, and we're going to tie business lines, so the budget for each department, up against the board's priorities and the board's goals, and then the strategies and the measures. And so again, what we're trying to do is make sure that every penny that we spend, it's aligned to what the board's priorities and goals are, and that there's a return on investment. And this final document that I'll share with you is a triangle that shows what are the core services that each department will commit to delivering on, and then the strategies from the previous page are on this page, and those things that are red or yellow are really prime opportunities for continuous improvement projects. And in order for a department to receive additional funds, additional money higher than the amount that they had the previous year, then they have to deliver on their core commitments, which means that they're in the green.
So all these processes merge together through our view and our commitment to staying committed to the mission. And we're using all this process to come together to create a budget to support that mission. So now we're going to get into the guts of the data. So what I have before you is a summary of the strategic investments. It was hard to put this on a slide because there's so much data, but I want you to refer to the handout that has a blue headings at the top. It's a short one. And what I'm outlining for you is how we've taken our spend and outlined it to the items in the strategic plan. Now, keep in mind, we were building the budget before the strategic plan's contents really started getting developed, so we had to kind of pre-plan what those things were. So we created a budget that is spending about over $50 million to support our strategic direction. And so the breakdown on the handout that you have follows along this summary. So how much, we put $28 million in schools to support, $28 million to support student-centered decision-making, 21 of that in schools, and then you can see the breakdown line by line and an explanation of what that's made of. Another almost $16 million for growth, over $300,000 on community engagement and influence, almost $6 million in creating better systems, and safety and security, $1.7 million. So I'm happy to say, or I'm pleased to say, that we were able to repurpose existing budget dollars to cover about half this cost. We weren't able to carve $50 million out of our current operations to fund strategic planning, so that we are asking for a higher budget than our target. And this is why. So if you guys remember, and I used this process last year, everybody seemed to really like it, so I went back to it. But we start with our target of $635 million, and immediately off the top, $106 million comes out to support children that are our residents but do not attend our schools. We're also required to transport those children to the cost of $8 million. So immediately, our budget target is reduced to $529 to support the students that we educate within our buildings. Then further reduced are our fixed expenses, about $36 million. So we have to make debt. We have to transfer money from the general fund to pay for some of our debt payments, and that actually increased this year. If you recall, we took on a COPS issue to help fund the Mercy and Cairns buildings. We are also required to transfer $3.3 million every year into the building maintenance fund that's required from the facility master plan. We built these beautiful billion-dollar buildings, and the state requires us at the value of $500,000 to put in the fence so that we can maintain these buildings and not have them not fall apart. We also pay the Hamilton County a lot of money, $4 million a year, to collect property taxes for us. And then we have some contractual obligations of close to $10 million. Those things are made up of the retirement sick leave conversion, stipends for lead teachers, principal stipends, those kinds of things are in those items. There's a requirement in one of our bargaining units to have $50,000 set aside for professional development for the union members. And then we have $1 million in liability insurance premiums. So that takes our available balance down to less than $500 million to support our 36,000 growing students. So we worked really hard to close that window. The school budgets totaled up to about $303 million. Centrally managed budgets to $219, and that's what's not already deducted off of the previous slides. And then this morning, we received an additional $7 million Title I allocation. We haven't decided how that's going to get allocated within the lines. It doesn't mean we can go spend $7 more million, but we're going to use that money to relieve some of the pressure on the general fund. So we were able to reduce the budget request proposal to $657 million. And I'm just reminding you that $50 million of that is on strategic investments, and 21 is new stuff that we couldn't repurpose. So now I'm showing you, this is how we spend the money. This is how our budget. So 56% of it is spent on employees, salaries and benefits. 34% is purchase services, which is kind of a very vague word for you. But these are state-defined, Ohio Department of Education defined codes. And so I'm going to go into more detail on what those things look like. Also want to draw attention to the sliver of transfers. That's the debt maintenance transfer, supplies, and capital outlay at 1%. So remember I told you I can now do some analytics on the budget information before it gets approved and loaded. This didn't come out very nicely with the black ink up there, so I apologize for that. But out of all of our personnel costs, between the general fund and the school-wide pool, 75% of that is spent on certificated employees. And what that means is the children on the academic and instructional side of the house. So 25% are civil servants. So those are the paraprofessionals and central office non-certificated people. So this is how the personnel cost breaks out by function. So what's their purpose? So close to 48% is in regular ed, special education 17%, vocational ed. And then the really odd light blue window up there, it says community service and preschool. That's ODE's strange label for preschool. So as you can see, the lion's share of our spend is on direct instructional costs. Okay, so remember the big slide on purchase services? The lion's share of that purchase service cost of $227 million, $100 million of that's tuition that we pay for children to go outside or because they have special needs that we can't serve in our buildings. 17% of that is transportation, so that's over $40 million. And then you can see the rest of the expenses, capital, Utilities went up because we actually are projected to go up because we're having 2 more buildings, classrooms. I'm sorry, 2 new schools. And this slide I really like because it breaks it down between last year and this year. The 2 left, this is as a percent of our total spend, our total budget, that over almost 90% of it is spent in the classroom, either in the classroom or supporting student services. Services that support students. And then we were able to, because of our mission matrix work, we were able to actually shift more of that money into that group of supporting students directly. And so I think, I haven't had a chance to compare that to how other districts do that. I don't know if I have access to their information, but I'd be interested to see how we compare to other districts. What we're doing is shrinking our centralized administrative costs and putting that dollar into the classroom. So, having said that, the big document you have in front of you is the document you're used to seeing. Public got a smaller version of this. So this is the proposed budget for fiscal year 20 compared to the original budget of fiscal year 19. At the very bottom of that, I'm showing you how we revised the current year budget to support some of those unplanned expenses for like the $10 million advance in that we did, temporary advance in for Starkville Stadium, and then the $8 million that we incurred to help support the debt for Mercy and Cans. And then the increase, if you recall, there was a $6 million increase to renovate Mercy that wasn't part of our borrowing. And so the increase from one year to the next isn't as big as it initially looked. And then what I've given you off to the side is an explanation of all the personnel changes. There was a lot of reorganization between My Tomorrow, the curriculum, and the ITM crew, so it was hard to keep track of all that movement. I did the best I could with you. So with that, can we answer any of your questions for you?
Do board members have questions or comments? Mr. Davis.
On that last slide, when you were showing the comparison, I can see, but how many percentage points is it?
So the lighter blue, the first chunk on the bar chart to the left that's direct, those are the school budgets. So over 40%, almost 50% of our budget is in the schools. The next blue big chunk is on the value that we spend on students to support, or instruction, supporting students in instruction, like the curriculum that we just purchased, or Department of Student Services, the My Tomorrow texts that are in the ITM budget, transportation, tuition, those kinds of things that directly impact the services students are in that middle chart. The green chart is our centrally managed budget, so it'd be like my department and the board's budget, purchasing, some of this centralized facilities expenses, and then the last little purple thing is all the district, those are the fees that we pay to the Hamilton County auditor.
So on your 2 blues, you went from
88%
to
to
92?
almost 90, so we increased it at 1.5% from one year to the next.
That's excellent, thank you.
I think I'm going to follow up on that because I'm still not clear about that particular chart and the arrow. And I think what I'm thinking about is, as you're talking about equity measures and what have you, and how I see equity as is defined, I'm comfortable with the equity plan, how it's written in the budget, but I see most of our equity measures occurring in student and instructional support. And so help me understand what this arrow means again, because it's going from the dark blue pointing to the green. I'm not sure what that means.
What I was trying to show was the movement of how much more we're spending in students and support for students than we did last year as a percent of the budget. So it's just, we're taking money out of our central functions and putting it into the school, so we're spending more money on students than we did last year. That's what all the arrows just pointing to the change.
Okay, so the green block is shrinking.
Yes.
Okay. And then just a clarification, I can't see the yellow highlight on page 12. What is that? Anybody can help me with that? Red, yellow, and green.
Page 12.
Page 12.
Okay, wait a minute, let me get that slide
It
back
just
up.
says yellow. It just says yellow.
Oh, it just says yellow?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, yes.
duh. I can't see the yellow. It's 'cause it's
yeah.
yellow. Okay.
Oh,
We can change, I'll make them all black letters. Sorry about that.
Okay, it's, I should have known that. but-
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Ms. Bowers?
Just for clarity and just so I'm understanding it correctly, on page 8, the progression from the 80s to the 2000s to next year is really the combination of not just student-based or budgeting or staff-based budgeting, but when you were asking about how that show equity, and if I'm understanding it clearly, that you're showing equity by putting more dollars into what the schools say that they need individually,
correct,
and that's where you're building the equity.
correct.
Okay.
That was the $4.3 million, yes.
Mr. Messer?
Yeah, just going back kind of to the initial part of the presentation that the superintendent gave. You know, we've had lots of conversations since I've been on the board about employee engagement. And I think page 2 and 3 have the great people. That perhaps is another place to have it listed so that, you know, part of having great people is ensuring that they are as the most engaged workforce, that'll direct a whole group of activities probably. So perhaps that would be
Absolutely.
an add there.
Thank you.
And then, you know, that whole great learning environments, and this then ties to some of the questions I have about the specific line items in the budget. And I don't know when, will we do that during the treasurer's report, or how does that work?
Yes, ma'am.
Pardon me?
If you have questions?
Yeah, okay. So, so under the great learning environments, it says teacher supplies. Probably know where this is going.
Yes.
So copy clicks, I mean, that to me is like a weird thing that's even a bullet. That's just how you measure a piece of, you know, but, you know, I don't even think that, to me, that, yes, there's probably a lot of dollars to that, but what I think the most important thing, though, in that list is classroom supplies. And then if you go into the budget, I think I counted like $2 million that said office and classroom supplies. And so are we, I know we're doing some of the back-to-school stuff and the teacher celebration. Is that $2 million in supplies that
Where is
in
in
the?
the treasurer's report? Are you in the treasurer's report?
Yeah, treasurer's report, my
That's this.
page 17 and 18. So there's ACE products and services to provide instructional and office supplies to the district. That's 500,000. Then there's Amazon.com to provide various school supplies. Then there's Ion Wave Technology, again says instructional supplies. And then there is Reliable Product Services, instructional and office supplies.
Right, so those are just the contracts that are coming for approval. That's not to spend out the whole budget. That's what the central office is negotiating for district-wide contracts. So we're creating a blanket purchase order for schools to buy off of. But there's a ton of other spending that happens at the school level to buy supplies for themselves in their budgets. We spend well over $3 million a year just on instructional supplies.
Just on what?
Just instructional supplies across the district. And that's just in the general fund and the school-wide pool. You know, we have all these other funds that also spend money on some of those things. Not all of them, but some. But so what you're seeing in the treasurer's report that's asking permission for me to enter in an agreement with these companies is just as they come up for renewal on contracts. It's not intended to spend out the whole budget or commit the whole budget. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
to some degree. I think, you know, when you have it in here as, you know, $400,000, $500,000 pools, I mean, we could buy a whole lot of office supplies for classrooms for a fraction of that, where we would negate people having to dip out of their pockets and that type of thing. And again, I think we're gonna,
The
make.
dipping out of the pockets thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is more of a timing of there's always money left on the table in the budget in terms of instructional supply money. And I think it's because the schools tend to hold on to their budgets because they're afraid they're gonna run out, and then it gets too late, so it doesn't get run out. So what we're putting into place next year is quarterly spending patterns to make sure that people are actually spending the money in the year they're supposed to spend it with the children, instead of trying to hold on to the money in case, being afraid they're gonna run out.
Yeah, so I think that could be a part of it, but I think very specific language to the principals with the upfront expectation, because my first review of this last year being on the board, I was shocked at how much, because I was told, oh, well, that's passed down to the principals and they distribute it. And then when we went back and looked, the majority of that had not been spent. So teachers didn't know that was even available, and the principals didn't make it available, so it was money left on the table. So I think, it's great to have this in here, as long as then there's some process management to make sure it gets in the hands of the people who actually need it, and it's not, left over. Thank you. Oh, and then I have
Go ahead.
a few other questions as it relates to some of the specific line items.
In the budget or in the treasurer's report?
Well, I'll hold those, because there's some of the major line items in the treasury report, but I think they're tied in the budget, but I'll hold that till the treasury report.
Okay.
There's nothing in the treasurer's report that's not been budgeted. Does that make sense? But it's not the whole budget that's being spent tonight. Thank God.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Bolton?
Thank you. I really don't have as many questions as I usually do for a couple of reasons. But one reason is that last year's budget was very difficult from a time frame. And I appreciate this year that the time frame, while it was a little delayed at the end, there was a new process that was used. And I think that's helpful. And so people, I think, should have a little bit more confidence in it because of that process. And hopefully that kind of process will get even deeper and richer and more engaging. I still have a problem about pooling because it makes it very, very difficult for us that have to go back to the community to actually be able to monitor and oversee what we need to be able to oversee. So as we proceed with this budget, I know you're often able to say, well, we can deconstruct this pooling and it's going here, here, here. I think it's possible that the Finance Committee, and certainly this member of the Finance Committee, will want to see that more often. And maybe you want to address it, because I know the pooling allows for greater flexibility, it allows for a number of things, but it also makes it extremely difficult for us to see, any line item or so below the OPU or what have you. If you want to comment.
So yes, absolutely, I'd love to comment. So, one of my long-term goals is to come up with a comprehensive budget process. And so what you have to approve tonight are two resolutions. One of them is the final appropriations for this year. We can only spend money at the fund level, or you approve money spending at the fund level. We've never had the tools before in order to be able to consolidate the budgets and report on them that way. And so that's what we're working towards. So my suggestion would be at the next Finance Committee, whenever that may be, probably in August, I'll be able to present you a consolidated budget by fund, by object code on how that's being spent. So you can see where we're spending all of our monies, not just the major funds.
Well,
I think that will help you a lot.
To piggyback on what Mr. Messer said before the meeting started, then I will buy the meal that day, that we get to see that kind of detail again, as we once used to be able to maybe not merge the non-general fund with the general fund, but at least, forgive me, but it's old school blue book kind of approach that I think helped us. That would be great. Also, it would be, and I like the way you broke this down from the strategic plan, and it would be great too to have a narrative of a kind of a listing of why this budget is higher than what we had targeted. I mean, again, as you've mentioned, the curricula that we've put into place, the textbooks, because we're going to need to be able to explain that in public in a more of a narrative rather than showing a chart.
Right.
And I think, if anything, it's possible that this budget could have been even a little bit higher from a standpoint of the first year of the strategic plan, because at that point in time, we're probably going to have to be holding to this kind of number and for these 3 years. So just as a thought. The other thing is, it would be great to know what we are not spending it on this year. We don't need to know that tonight, but one of the big questions is, so what did you, and I know the superintendent talked about this before as the treasurer, but what are we not doing? Because that is part of our credibility too when we go to the public for this renewal that's going to last 10 years. What did we not do? What did we decide not to do? And that's all the comments I have. Thank you.
Yeah. I just think in follow-up to that, I'm still really curious about the matrix that you all implemented, because I think that would tell us a lot. I mean, my curiosity is also not, in addition to what did we not spend with this, but how did the teachers and the schools align with what the board priorities were in terms of that matrix? Just some general idea of what that looked like. So it's just curiosity for me. Mr. Davis?
I just want to make sure I'm reading this right in regard to strategic priorities. We're hiring 8.2 new counselors,
That's correct.
and to Ms. Bolton's point in regards to what we're not doing, I don't see us particularly putting any more resources into like librarians, or what I've missed that somewhere else.
So the schools choose how they invest money into their libraries. We didn't make any centralized investments, although we're spending about over $6 million in new textbook adoption and online curriculum. So
So we aren't adding any additional media specialists. Our kids have more access to books in the classroom. Some schools do choose to keep a library, in addition to the fact that, to be very transparent, it is harder and harder to find people who are graduating out of college with a library or media specialist background. That isn't the reason that you don't see the expansion, but I just wanted to give you that detail as well.
No, I appreciate that. And under counselors, those are both social service, social worker type counselors?
No, those are college and career access.
Those are like college
Yes.
counselors.
We've been adding more and more over the last several years, so 8 for the upcoming school year. And then maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we added 10.
maybe. So we're trying to, what we did is went through an analysis, well, our My Tomorrow initiative required that we put more counseling services out in our schools. That was the first thing. And we started looking at our counselor to student ratios and comparing it to national trends, and we realized that we were much higher than other districts. So the national trend is about 350 students per counselor. We were up between 500 and 600. So this year we got us to 450 at the high school level, 9 to 12. And then we also realized that our K-8 buildings, the 7th and 8th graders, weren't having access to counseling like our 7th and 8th graders in the 7-12 schools. So we added days of counseling to those buildings for equitable purposes.
Do we have a similar comparison in regard to social workers?
So this coming school year will be, quite honestly, the first year that our school social workers are truly working on social worker work. So quite honestly, they've been in the past tracking down attendance, truancy, and not really having the opportunity to work with our kids around social and emotional learning. And so you'll see within the budget where we added attendance clerks to our schools.
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
So that our
attendance
social
clerks.
workers could truly do social work. And they are split up between schools, but we're really happy to say that they're going to be able to work on social and emotional learning. If I could also just jump back for just a moment to the counseling. counselors. So Jen mentioned the formula that we use, but I just want to also bring to your memory, or tell you for the first time if you don't know, that many of our high schools do have college and career access partners. And so we put them in the mix as well in terms of breaking that number down as far as we can in terms of the number of kids that a college or career access counselor or guidance person has at their disposal. So
Thank
we have CYC and Grad Cincinnati who are in many of our schools, and they provide a lot of staff that actually help break down that number smaller and smaller for our kids.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Messer, followed by Ms. Bolton.
Yes, I'll go ahead and give my other two questions, get those out of the way as it relates, because they are obviously interconnected. The one is, there are two different agreements for Teach for America that total $145,000. Could you give a little bit more detail on what that is?
Yes, and so over the last several years, we have used Teach for America to be able to supply us with a teaching complement that we necessarily haven't been able to staff on our own. So for example, special education as well as mathematics, those are two shortage areas in terms of teachers, in addition to minority teachers. And so we've looked to Teach for America to be able to help us fill some of those positions. Our experience with Teach for America is, for the most part, a good percentage of the Teach for America's teachers actually stay within CPS. I know that oftentimes it's touted that they come, they stay for 2 or 3 years and they leave. That has not been our experience. In addition, we do have quite a few administrators who have gone through the Teach for America ranks and actually have been very successful. And so we're very proud of that work. It is just another avenue that we use to be able to build up and engage employee complement.
And so is the goal that we will then build those capabilities to do some of those things kind of on our own going forward? Or have we just said, hey, that's an area, we're just not going to focus on X, Y, and Z, we will contract that? Or is it
No.
that we will work towards?
It's both. So quite honestly, we are very focused on not just recruiting people to CPS, because when you recruit, that means that you're already in a state of urgency because you need someone because there's a vacancy. But we're also focused on attracting. So how do we build relationships with people before we even know in existence that there is a position that exists, but this person has a skill set that we might need. And so we're looking at how do we make ourselves more attractive to districts, or I'm sorry, to teachers or educators, because to be quite honest with you, the universities aren't graduating a lot of people who are coming out with teacher degrees or teacher education degrees. And so we have to be able to be very nimble, be very flexible, and be able to look at a variety of different places to be able to recruit and attract people to Cincinnati. So it's two, it's not just one or the other.
Okay. And then just the other, and this one is a little bit way in the weeds, but as I was looking through all the kind of expenses and specifically in things like the HVAC system upgrades and all this stuff, one in particular I did not see on there were my good friends at Leap Academy. And having been there, and there were definitely some needs for upgrades, and I didn't see them specifically called out in some of those upgrades. And so just putting that out there.
Yes, so we didn't put something that's that school specific in this plan, but after Robin, Brandon, and I had an opportunity to go out to LEAP, based upon our time there, we actually built a work plan that included not only facilities but also curriculum and instruction and testing, and put together a plan and identified the leads on those specific items. And so those have been worked on. Many of those items were completed before the school year ended, but some of them will take place over the summer. What you will see in here in reference to LEAP is the expansion in terms of growing additional grades.
Yeah, I just, in some of the things like playground, HVAC, et cetera, it listed the some
Yes.
schools very specifically where that one wasn't, and I know those are still either kind of maybe in progress, but a couple haven't started yet, so
Sure.
just making sure that they hadn't gotten forgotten.
Absolutely.
And then at a higher level, while we're, kind of talking as this goes, I would love us to align on kind of maybe a quarterly or a semi-annual checklist that we are able to go through to ensure that the student experience is consistent no matter which door you walk in. That then would feed the budget process, because it wouldn't be just, oh, well, we heard from these three that this needs to get done. We've done our we've gone through all buildings, and this is the plan for this budget cycle based on that assessment.
So just to remind you that when we did the COPS issue to purchase Mercy and renovate cans, we also put, I think it was 1.3 million in LEAPs and Spencer? Or no, Carthage. LEAP and Carthage on HVAC and new windows, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just going off the top of my head, but we did put money aside. That money's sitting in a different fund.
Okay, got it.
But they just may not have put their contracts through yet for repairs.
But we will follow up on that.
Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, just to follow up, since I'm thinking in terms of this coming year, for not only watching this budget, but also thinking about the next budget. It's never too early to do that, as you're already exhausted from this one. But as so important in our equity policy is the equitable distribution of resources. And I appreciate particularly the last 2 years you've been, I think, working hard on that. But I think it would also be really good to kind of expand our definition to the more national and international definition of equity, where we're talking in terms of being able to monitor the gender equity, the racial, the economic equity piece. I know we've been doing it in these big steps, and they've been big steps, and we're to be applauded for it, looking at what a particular building needs versus another building, or changing, but how much money are we investing in the gap that we may have regarding discipline? How much money are we investing, if you will, in sports for females versus males? We have to start, as we are now well beyond our infancy in equity effort, and I think way ahead of the rest of the state, frankly, from what I know. The reality is it's time for us now to really take that next leap, and hopefully with the data and the technology that we have, and some of these folks that are watching it, we've got to get to the heart of that, because the poverty piece, the gender piece, the zip code piece, the whole discipline piece, all those things are part of really measuring whether or not we're actually practicing the policy that we set forward as our top priority. So as we go forward, it'd be great to find ways to begin to measure that and to maintain a record of that.
So just to speak to that, and in addition to having these new tools that would allow us to do this, we also have, I just want to have a shout out to Emily Campbell, who's like my pioneer. She's actually taken the entire curriculum budget and broken out by subject code, so that we can start tracking our money on subject. So if the state were ever to ask us, how much money did you invest in algebra, and according to your results, what's your return on investment there? It's just coming down the pipeline, so we're trying to position ourselves to do that. So we started with Emily, who's very complicated budget, and she's been a huge trooper. And then next year we'll expand it, but it's all in the coding of how we spend our money and using it with fidelity. So thank you.
Mr. Morosky?
That was a great lead-in, thank you, Member Bolton. I have a few questions, a couple comments. I'm going to start with a comment because what Ms. Bolton just said is sort of in line with that. I've been interested, as most folks here know, in adding some explicit language in our strategic plan regarding racial disparities in our district. I'm a firm believer that if we don't call things what they are, we're not going to make a dent. And so when we talk about equity, I think we need to be tracking the racial disparities in discipline and in educational outcomes. There are a lot of disparities in our district, certainly. That one is the most glaring, and that plagues our entire country, and I would like to be leaders in actually calling that out. I think it can start in the strategic plan, but I think it also requires strategic investments and not just high-level esoteric sort of, we're investing in this zip code or this neighborhood. It's racial disparity. and that's what the problem is. We need to have the courage to say that. Also, the other disparity piece that I think would be great, maybe it's not for next summer, maybe it is in here, but as far as the equity piece regarding the ELL of students that are immigrating to this country that come in April or May, and then summer happens. And we do a pretty nice job at Dater in the summertime. But for younger kids, I know there's some things at Roberts, and maybe it's too expensive and maybe it's not possible, but I don't always take no as an answer right at face value. To have some sort of extended experience for kids that are just immigrating to this country late in the school year, I'm talking a month, 2 months even, so that it's somewhere near level playing field in the fall. Couple just specific questions then. One is the increase to the schools is extremely exciting, as is the increase to curriculum. My question for the schools is, and I don't need to see it, but is the increase to the schools, does that get allocated to the schools in the same amounts, or is that also done through an equity lens, i.e. does each school get different amounts?
So it's both. So they get
Okay.
Student-based staffing, and then also their equity request, which was very different and very specific by
And
school.
then each one of those, okay, cool. I thought it was, I just wanted to make sure. That's why I said I don't need to see it. And then also with facilities, kind of piggyback off Mr. Messer, and it might have been in the mega treasurer's report specifically, I didn't see it. I'm gonna give an assignment to this effect later anyway. So teaser alert. Is there a specific plan to make Spencer a legitimate high school in this? Because I know they've provided a list of what they need to be high school. It's big, it's a big list. I'm not saying everyone gets everything they want, but is that part of this?
Not necessarily a part of the budget for the upcoming school year, but
Okay.
it is a part of a conversation around a long-term plan as it relates to Spencer.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
But they are growing a grade every year.
they are growing a grade though.
Thank you,
For the upcoming school year.
thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you for your presentation on the budget.
Thank you. Thanks for your feedback.
Thank you. Okay, does anyone have any kudos? Mr. Messer?
I'd like to give kudos to our superintendent and treasurer for that immense amount of work that did not happen overnight. And them, along with their entire team, who gathered for countless meetings and the prioritization, which probably felt laborious. But I think the fact that Ms. Bolton didn't have lots of questions probably speaks to a good process. And so kudos to both of you for the presentation.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. It's been an
Gotcha.
incredible
Okay.
partnership with Laura and the performance leadership team. It's
Absolutely.
definitely a team effort.
Yes. Okay, any other kudos? Mr. Morosky?
I was afforded the opportunity to go to the Center for Independent Living Options, Silos, free summer camp today for teens with disabilities. And a number of the students there are our CPS students. And so the kudos are all around to the students for engaging in this sort of self-empowering, bettering activities in the summertime, because a lot of the program is regarding like a bridge into what's after high school and more independent living, with a special kudo and shout out to my new friend Naomi, who's a rising junior at Dater, who's really good at checkers. She's won 7 games in a row, and she beat me to make it. I was her 7th victim.
What a surprise.
Okay, Ms. Bolton? Ms. Bolton?
Yes, as I always do, I want to shout out to the Marvin Lewis Learning is Cool. I know we don't have Coach Lewis next year, but this is always an impressive list for both Cincinnati Public and North College Hill and Covington Independent. And the names of the kids that made the A roll and were participation in this program is phenomenal, and I know we appreciate that foundation. I will say one thing, I hope that the high schools start getting a few more names on this list. Compared to our elementary kids, our high schools, students need to kick it up a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other kudos? Yes, Treasurer Wagner.
Thank you, if I may. I just wanted to do a really big shout out to Tracy Moore, who's the secretary in the treasurer's office, who was here until 1 o'clock in the morning, putting this 72-page treasurer's report together. The canceling of the July meetings threw a bunch of people into a panic, and so Wednesday afternoon, 200 contracts showed up, so that had to be reviewed. And so she just really went above and beyond the call of duty. So,
Just let her know that we do appreciate the hard work that she did, yeah. Okay. All right, Ms. Bates, please present the retirements.
Yes, I have 3 retirements from our certificated personnel. They're all teachers: Mary Ann Donovan, Mary Ellen F. Dwyer, Robert K. Maddox. And we thank them for their service to our children and wish them well and congratulate them on their retirement.
Thank you. We do not have any requests to speak for hearing of the public, so we are going to move on with our board matters item. And I believe that this agenda item comes from Finance Committee, so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bolton.
It does, from a standpoint of our government liaison folks,
Yes.
briefing us, and this is an important issue. And very frankly, I'm not aware of the final result of this or the final status of this. And what this is the planned reform of the repeal of number 70, House Bill 70, which dealt with distressed districts. It was not a good bill to begin with, and we've taken a stand against it as the same time we took a stand against the current report card that is used to determine that distress status. We do know that it got through with some major reform in the House, and it was in the Senate, and it was going to be part of the actual bill that just passed regarding the governor's budget, I recall, I believe. But my understanding that the part of this that dealt with the distress district reform may not have been part of the budget, and it remains to be fixed. And I wanted to bring this to the attention because the fix of the distress district budget possibility or law actually might be more damaging to CPS than the present effort. And I think some of us know a little bit about this, and we need to know more. But a relatively good friend of ours at this in Columbus, Senator Lerner, is leading the charge on the reforming, addressing the major problems. But in so addressing them, the school board still continues to lose control. There still would be a different CEO. The process starts earlier than later. And the mayor appoints a business person, and the superintendent of state superintendent appoints 3. So these are things that would not bode well to a district that is moving forward like we are. And there is also a part of it that initially, and again, I don't know the final status, and I hope that'll be an administration assignment when we get there, is to find out what the final status is. But there was also talk that it would separate school buildings rather than declare an entire district. And again, that would be one more, I think, inherently discriminatory practice against those folks of economic disadvantage, and also the urban schools as well as the rural schools. So I just want us to keep in our mind where this is going and what this would mean.
Yes. Ms. Bates.
Well, I kind of heard, I agree with what you said, but I want to counter with urgency. I
Good.
don't think, I believe that this is on the agenda tonight, so we can have a discussion about direction to give our governmental relations consultants for this week, for
Yes.
conference committee.
You're absolutely right.
So we need to have a discussion about a position, because the initial bill that is being repealed was, you know, the districts pretty much being taken over and the superintendent being replaced by a CEO, and those districts are not seeing, you know, any movement. So that's, you know, but to move to individual school oversight, you know, and having the mayor involved, number one, that's against our city charter, because our charter separates the school district and the city operations. But individual schools, when you have a district as large as ours, with, you know, the levels of poverty that we have and the acute need for, you know, mental health services, this could be a real mess. I'm not sure that these legislators who are not really associated or have a lot of in-depth knowledge about our urban districts understand what the needs really and truly are.
They don't.
So I'm going to suggest that we, you know, continue to discuss this at the table tonight, so that our legal counsel can put some, you know, put a statement together, so we could tomorrow give this to our government relations consultants.
Mr. Morosky?
Thank you, President Jones. Well, I have an opinion about this. I think it sucks. I think the way it currently stands does as well. But I'm trying to figure out, and I was trying to figure out coming into this meeting exactly what a solution could be, to what kind of direction you could give. And at this point, unfortunately, it seems like since we're already at conference committee and this thing's going to get passed some way, shape, or form next week, it doesn't appear that we have a whole lot of time to do anything but say just keep it how it is for now, and then direct our lobbyists to lean on the legislature going forward. Because to me, this entire thing, and the problem with the state legislature, if I may, is that, and maybe us too, just to be fair, any governing bodies, you talk about things in these bubbles, like the state report card is over here, and then HB 70 is over here, when really all these things need to be discussed at the same time, because that state report card is what's driving this nonsense, and vice versa. So I hate to say it, but I feel like advising our folks to advise them to just leave it alone for now is probably the most reasonable thing to do. In my opinion, I'm anxious to hear what anybody else says, though.
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, I think Ms. Bates is right about the urgency. I also want to reiterate, I am not exactly clear what the final status of this was regarding the budget, and then whether or not it remains in the Senate or it has now gone to conference outside the budget. So I would need that information. And I would also say that to leave it alone, that means I don't think that that's where we want to be. I think that there's been enough pushback with what Senator Leonard proposed, that there's still time, unless it's completely finished, that it could be tweaked or changed or adjusted. But again, I'm not sure where the final status is, and perhaps legal counsel can tell us what the final status is. We might have no other option but what Mr. Morosky suggests, that we took our stand earlier, but it seems to me that this is still something that we need to watch.
Here, because I'm just in a couple minutes research. It looks like HB 154, which was the bill that was introduced to repeal HB 70, passed the House at the beginning of May, was referred to the Senate, and has been given a first hearing in the Education Committee of the Senate. That's now, whether there's other efforts going on elsewhere in the budget bill or wherever, I don't know.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Bolton.
That is exactly what I've been able to find out. And I know that there was an attempt to make it be part of the budget. The budget has passed, and so I don't know, reading through quickly the executive piece, at least it's gone through enough of the iterations to get close to being passed by the 30th, I guess. But it would seem to me if it has not yet passed, there's still time to tweak this or change this for our benefit. But again, it's important that we figure out what it may mean. But again, we don't have enough information necessarily to know how to approach it. So we may have to assign for a later time or a smaller group.
Ms. Bates?
I don't think we have that kind of time, because this week is, from
has
what
to
I'm
pass.
hearing, is when this bill's being heard in the Senate. And then they're going to recess. So I don't believe we have time. I believe what was the ask of Mr. Glover is to, if we wanted to take a position on this, to have something to him this week.
Right. And I'm just, if it's part of the budget, it might be
It's
too
not.
late. But if it's separate, I don't know that it has, as a separate thing, I don't know that it has to pass this week.
Or else it dies and they reopen it, and I don't think they're gonna let it, that was what I heard, that it was not going to just go away this
Exactly.
week. So we need to address it this week.
Okay. Mr. Morosky?
And if it was repealed, which I think it, quite frankly, may have been, and that's kind of what we're dancing around here, then that would be great, in which case the direction to the lobbyists would be, tell them not to do anything else. Stop. You've done enough, you've done your job, it's great, it's gone, now let's just relax, if it has, in fact. I'm torn, no one asked, but I'm torn between Ms. Bates and Ms. Bolton as far as the urgency of now or the wait. Again, I think it probably would just fall back on, if it wasn't repealed, leave it as it is, and let's work on it in this coming year and try to get it out through the legislative process, irrespective of the budget.
Can I insert my question? Is the thinking that it will be repealed, given where it is in the timeframe?
Right, but then we have the new bill that's the replacement bill, and that's the problem.
Okay, that's helpful. Ms. Bolton?
I believe it did, as you said, get repealed in the House, but I don't think it was repealed yet in the Senate. And the issue is whether or not it's in the governor's budget or not, and it's the status of where it is.
Being told a couple different things, but I believe that the effort to include it in the budget bill was also unsuccessful. At least the
Great.
Senate's version, it was not included in the
So
Senate's.
there is time.
Okay, so again, what is the pleasure of the board? Because I'm hearing two options. One is that we should go ahead and take a position, write a letter stating our position and submit, and then the other option is to wait until the action occurs and then proceed. Ms. Bolton?
I would like the administration to give us a summary of what it is that we are going to either be in favor of or opposed to.
Yeah, we don't
Because
know.
it's been so confusing, and it has changed at least 3 times. And I think then that we probably need to have them, after they've informed us of that, then we would have to, as a board, somehow take a stand based upon what we think is most egregious. And that's a timeline that we're not going to be meeting in July, but we certainly could at least give broad definition to our administration
Okay,
to send the letter, if not a resolution.
okay. Mr. Morosky?
And correct me if I'm incorrect. I'm looking at Ms. Bolton and Ms. Bates, and definitely Ms. Bolton, who's an OSBA fan, who I believe has recommended to just stick with, leave it how it is, write a letter. I would suggest writing a letter to that effect, but also perhaps, since we're talking about legislature things and conference committee this week, and I know this isn't on the agenda, but if I may, they have cut mental health funding, which would impact some of our people in our schools. And perhaps, as far as an assignment goes, have the administration look into that, and what might a letter look like to say, could you, restoring that funding along with leave things the way they are with the House version of this budget.
Ms. Bates?
I believe we did direct Mr. Glover because we knew that
In finance, you did?
for wraparound, it's included in wraparound
Right.
services.
Right.
And that's something that the board has been in favor of. So we did instruct Mr. Glover to go ahead and educate.
This week?
Yeah,
It
last
would be-
Thursday, we
okay.
told him.
Okay.
But the question was this bill, but we felt, of course, strongly because that's, that's been so instrumental to our work in helping our kids or the wraparound services because it was, the governor put it in and, the House took it out and it's just, so we made it a priority.
Okay, any other questions or comments about this item? Did you have one more, Ms. Bolton?
Just to see if we don't need to convene as a board to agree with a letter.
Right,
We would have to convene to pass a resolution.
yes.
And I would imagine, we still have some crit, I think, with Senator Lerner, who has been relatively supportive of us as it goes. And I think if the administration can find out what it all entails, and certainly the administration, besides the power of the board issues, the administration would know what would be dangerous or devastating to us instructionally or supervisory capacity. So I think a letter could be done and have us all sign it.
Okay. So, and I heard a couple of assignments come out of that, so
Yeah.
please, when we get to assignments, make
Thank
sure
you.
we get those on, get those documented. Okay. All right. We're going to move on to resolutions, and let's see, I'm going to ask Mr. Messer, can you introduce the first resolution?
Yes, happy to present a resolution setting district priorities for the renegotiation of the 1999 tax abatement agreement with the city of Cincinnati. I submit the resolution as written.
Is there a second?
Second?
Discussion. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs.
We're not
Bates?
going to discuss this?
Discussion. did I see hands?
Well,
I'm sorry. It went quick, sorry.
No kidding.
In discussion, any questions? Discussion?
I would like a couple of things explained,
Go ahead.
if that's okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'm not opposed to having it passed this
Gotta
quickly.
be quick,
I'll tell you that
okay.
right now. I was still resting up from the previous thing. But I would like, I think it's great, I would like maybe general counsel to explain like 1 and 2 and 3. And as general counsel approaches, I want to know if we have taken care of the question that was raised in Finance Committee regarding the $5 million issue, and was it have to do with the debt or COPS issues? We were going to seek out other counsel? Wasn't that?
So I haven't,
Wait, so I think she's referring to me asking you to contact Brenda Weimer about it? And you determined that it wasn't part of the COPS payment structure with the county payments, right?
it's not a part of the most recent COPS issue, no.
Correct.
So that's been resolved,
Yes.
okay? Is it part of previous payments?
The
Or
the
the
$5 million
$5
from
million?
the city goes into our debt fund to help pay for, because that money is supposed to be for school improvements, facility improvements. So if that were to go away, then we would have to take money out of our operating budget to cover it.
But legally, we could do that. And we,
Yes.
that's great.
Yes.
And then number 2,
The number 2 paragraph?
what does that really, yes, number 2 paragraph. What
Yeah,
does
so
it-
this is something that actually Mr. Driehaus talked about both, I think, in his presentation here as well as in Finance Commission, that tax increment finance agreements, the school millage portion should be reimbursed to the school district, that the the TIFs should not include the school millage. They can include all the other millage, but not the school millage.
And does that represent a difference of what we have now?
Well, yes,
Big time.
because it does, because
Okay.
they only reimburse 25% of
Okay.
27 for the districts, I believe, and 25 for the projects, or the other way around.
And then number 3, this also represents a major change?
Yeah, so this was where we had used market ready, I think, in the previous draft, and there was a desire of the board to spell that out, to say that residential abatements in area of the cities where abatement incentives are not necessary based on current market conditions. It spells out what was in the previous draft. So it's not a major change in terms of the draft, it's just spelling out market conditions.
But if I may, it's a major change. Does this pertain to residential?
It's a major change from our existing agreement,
Thank you.
certainly.
These are the
yes.
things I think the public needs to know. And then number 4, I was thinking that since we've added the creative workforce development opportunities for graduating students, I thought maybe we could then strike the internship one that is down in the lower paragraph, number 6. I mean, that workforce development piece, I think, is stronger than internships. And I think it speaks to where there might be some more issues. Another thing I would just say on behalf of the city, and I don't like to be on behalf of the city, but do they have a 2-year budget process? Are they biennial instead of annual? Is it annual? Okay, if their budget's annual, that's fine, thanks. Could you also, or somebody that put this in, could someone explain what we may mean by this, if it reaches a certain threshold, or if it's a certain amount? Is that number 8 or, 8? What was the reasoning, thinking there? Ms. Bates, I guess?
I mean, we discussed this because I think it was Columbus that has this in their agreement. So if there's a large development that has, significant impact, that it should be brought to our attention, and we would negotiate that separately from this
Okay.
agreement.
I think that's good. And then my last, if I might, my last comment that I wanted to make is we listed the school nurses and in the issue of health. The real challenge there for me is that it's so much more important for the city to maintain their 9 school-based health centers with us than it is necessarily for us to pay contract costs for school nurses. I mean, as we are trying to keep our leadership in school-based health centers, our largest partner is the city. And I didn't know if people felt we should add that or do it instead of the school nurses, just as a suggestion.
Will that take school nurses from those who do not have health care centers?
I don't think so. I mean, we currently have school nurses and school-based health centers, as you know better than I do from your background. But I just think the health department's sponsorship of school-based health centers is so much more crucial than, I mean, we can write a check and have for a number of years now to get the school nurses' services, but the school-based health centers, at least the way I understand how they run, it's the health department that sanctions at least 9 of our 20-some.
Okay. Ms. Bates?
I mean, we could just say, including school nurses and city health centers, and city-sponsored health centers.
City-sponsored, school-based health centers.
Yeah, let's add that, if that's.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I zipped past that. Not intentionally, I don't know where our
No,
head
it was my fault.
It's okay.
I was
Yeah.
delayed.
All right. Okay.
So it's not a
Any other discussion? Okay. Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
President Jones, can I suggest that there be
Yes.
just so that I'm sure that there be an amendment based on Ms. Bolton's comments? So I believe the two things I heard, and I wanted to make sure, were both in paragraph 6, following school nurses to add, quote, and city-sponsored school-based health centers. And then the last sentence of that same paragraph 6 to be deleted.
It's and instead of in.
That's what I said, sorry.
Okay.
And, yes.
And instead of in.
School nurses and
And.
A&D, city-sponsored school-based health centers.
Yes.
So perhaps
what
it's
I heard.
unanimous, but,
Yes.
but you may
So-
want to just have a.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is an amended resolution. We are voting on an amendment resolution with the 2 revisions. Yes, sir.
And the internship piece.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, the internship
He
piece.
struck that.
Is that?
Oh, you did? Okay.
Okay.
He struck it.
The last
last
sentence of that
sentence,
same paragraph
number
6, striking, the city should create internship opportunities for
Okay.
CPS students.
Now we're only shitting on them like once or twice as opposed to 15 times.
Oh, did we get it?
I think we got it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's been motioned and seconded that we accept the resolution with the amendments as stated.
So we need to know if the motioner and the seconder approve the revisions, or agree to the revisions.
Do the motion and second approve of the revisions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Okay. Mr. Davis, would you like to present the next resolution on behalf of the board?
The waiver,
It's the waiver.
I present a resolution to request a waiver for alcohol use at the School for the Creative and Performing Arts by the Cincinnati Opera Association. I present the resolution as written for adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Yes. Ms. Bates, please present the next resolution.
Yes, I present the fiscal year 2018-2019 final annual appropriations resolution. I submit this resolution as printed for adoption.
Is there a second?
Second?
Discussion? Ms. Wagner, please call roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Aye.
President Jones?
Aye. Ms. Bolton, please present the next resolution.
Thank you very much. I present resolution fiscal year 2019-2020 annual appropriations resolution. Be it resolved, the Board of Education, Hamilton County, that we provide current expenses and other expenses of said Board of Education during the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. I submit as written and hope for approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Discussion? Ms. Wagner?
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Aye.
President Jones?
Aye. Thank you. So the next resolution, Ms. Bolton and Mr. Messer, one of
Yes.
you can present.
I'll start, and Ms. Bolton can add. So you will see the revised, pardon me? Oh, sorry.
The
Let me,
motion.
okay, yeah.
Sorry, the parliamentarian.
Sorry, thank you very much. I present the 2020 regular board meeting schedule for the Cincinnati Board of Education and seek approval by the board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Now. is the time.
Thank you, all right. So, not tons of changes here, followed kind of our standard rotation, but rather than the 8:30 meetings, we have moved those to 4 p.m. As that'll be more conducive to board members' work schedules, et cetera. And then we did adjust April due to some holidays. We decided that would be good to proactively announce a bit of a brownout for the month of July so that there's not a last-minute scrambling. So we'll signal earlier with a placeholder of July 13th that we would use only if we need it. We also called out 3 off-site meetings. We kind of said once a quarter, but then we didn't want to stack them like month after month. So we spaced them out. So there's a February, an April, and then February, there is a May, and then there is an October. So that'll get us out to a variety of locations. Anything I missed, Ms. Bolton?
No, we do have our work sessions, the 3 that are there. One, of course, organizational, it'll be a new board opportunity in January, and then April Fools, unfortunately, is the date for the budget discussion in our work session, and then we have the one where we kind of, hopefully we'll get back in course of self-assessing in October. So those are there. I would keep everybody kind of in mind, the April one was difficult, as Mr. Messer mentioned, largely due to both Easter and Passover. So we have taken into consideration some of the major Jewish holidays as well as our Easter opportunity in April. Easter comes very late that month. And again, we try to keep it within the 40 meetings, largely due to, if you'll recall, 2 years ago, we reduced it from meeting every week to trying to have only 3 meetings a month, besides our committee meetings. And I think one of the items that Mr. Messer suggested, which I think was good, and he hasn't mentioned it yet, but it's for those off-sites, that they are a 4 o'clock off-site, not an evening, and maybe it can be more of a open house for that particular school as well. I think that's a really good idea that he had. And there's one kind of outlier. Both the July meeting is an 8:30 instead of a 4. There's also an 8:30 in May, anticipating graduation time frame there on the 20th. So that might be kind of one of the outliers. And we're open to what the board thinks of the choice between 8:30 versus 4, but it would be our suggestion. And I think we took into account with the staff work, and we appreciate Ms. Bruckner and Ms. Davis as well on getting the color coding right. And the only date that still needs to be confirmed is the Great City School date. Those dates have not yet been confirmed, but everything else I think has been worked out. And again, appreciate Mrs. Bruckner's work Friday to even give us a draft, and really appreciate Ms. Davis today in the midst of everything else getting us this draft to approve tonight. This is not easy.
Yes. And I want to thank you, because this assignment just came out last week, like Thursday, whenever we had the last board meeting. So appreciate the fact that the two of you came together so quickly to get it done. And I just want to be...
With wine, all things are possible.
With wine. So the off-site designations, these mean school sites. We aren't thinking about going to any other site other
No,
than our schools.
right, our
Okay.
schools.
And
Good point.
our administration has the freedom and flexibility to identify those for us, is what I'm thinking.
There was hope that we could hit the east, the west, and the central quarter, but the administration will know better than us as
Right.
to who to spotlight as well as who can get ready for
Okay.
such an effort.
Absolutely. Okay, any other questions, any other comments? It's been motioned and seconded, and Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Jones?
Aye. Thank you. Ms. Bates and Mr. Morosky, please present the final resolution.
All right. I have a resolution urging the Ohio General Assembly and Governor to require non-discrimination in the Ed Choice Voucher Program. I present this resolution as printed for adoption.
Second?
Second, any discussion or comments? Ms. Bates?
Yes, and I wanted to explain to the board why this was brought quickly, because this is also in the governor's budget. And there's a proposal to increase the Ed Choice vouchers to 7th and 8th graders with an increase over 2 years of over $30 million. And as the thought that behind this is that if the public schools are required to practice non-discrimination in their hiring, in their admissions, in their programming, if public monies are to be used, then those using public monies, even in the private sector, should adhere to that as well.
Any other comments?
I would just add to that, Ms. Bates and I talked about this earlier and appreciate administration getting this together so quickly. The current proposal would also, well, there's also talk, I should say, of allowing students already enrolled in Catholic schools paying tuition to be able to take vouchers. So, I mean, this could become like the Wild West of, there's always talk about raising the income threshold. And so we thought it was an appropriate time to do it, and that's why we felt a sense of urgency because the budget, as we've talked about already a couple of times tonight, is in conference committee. And we feel that these private or quasi-private, I can tell you with great certainty that some schools, half of their revenue budget comes from taxpayers. And when people find that out, they're typically appalled. So they get our money, they get the public's money, and they don't have to follow any rules. And so this asks politely that the governor and General Assembly require them to follow the rules.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Ms.
I
Bolton?
voted for a procedural reason against it, but certainly will not in a substantive way vote against this resolution.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Ms. Bates?
And if this does pass, that we ask this be passed along to Mr. Glover and Mr. Kearney for, to be on the record this week when this is discussed
Okay.
in
Great.
Columbus.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Aye.
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Messer?
Aye.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mr. President Jones?
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, Superintendent Mitchell, do you have a revised report?
I do. Part of the report that I'm going to present to you tonight is some language cleanup as it relates to the strategic plan, not in content, but in terms of actual language. So I did receive some feedback from board members regarding the some language as well as some content for the strategic plan. So what I'm going to give out tonight is just a revision that the administration has worked on as it relates to goals and strategies. The administration will be working on the strategic plan some more tomorrow in terms of the actual content. And so, based upon the suggestions that were provided by the board. So again, this was just language cleanup. There was some conversation around language that was used and how things were worded, and sentence structure that we cleaned up as related to the goals and the strategies. So again, the administration, we have a big block of time tomorrow scheduled so that we can have the opportunity, now that we have the budget process behind us, to thoroughly work through and look at the suggestions that came from board members.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the revised recommendations of the superintendent?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Any questions or comments?
Just a moment.
I'm sorry?
She said just a moment.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah,
Mr. Messer?
I do have one little comment, which is something somebody asked me who was a supporter of CPS earlier today, and they said, "What is your market share?" And I said, "Salesperson, you'd think I'd know that." And so I love that you have increased CPS market share, and I think the only thing is missing, 80%, or, what is that number? So what is our current market share? What's our future market share? And to me, then that directs the tactics, which is we will seek to then recruit geographically in these neighborhoods or at these schools, and we'll be very specific, all working towards how we're doing towards that goal. So that would be just one little thing I saw.
Madam Chair?
Other comments or questions? Ms. Bolton?
It's a question of the superintendent regarding the strategic plan. We're unveiling the strategic plan, or unveiling the strategic plan on August 9th. The board is not meeting in July. When does the board approve of the strategic plan prior to the unveiling? Do we have an August 1st, or is there a, when does the board actually say yes to this or no to this? Because we're not able to say yes or no to it right now for good reason. I'm just wondering, when will the board reconvene to accept or reject?
And we do need an opportunity to give feedback on the final draft.
August 7th.
August 7th is our next board meeting. Is that enough time?
That sort of makes a de facto strategic plan without board approval, because they won't have an opportunity to print anything if we decided to change anything or be concerned about anything. I mean,
What is specifically, what is the pleasure of the board? Because, we can always schedule a meeting if that's what board members want. That right now seems to be the only option. We said we didn't want to do a meeting in July. I don't know any other way of us coming together to approve it. Yes.
All right, maybe a convening of the strategic planning committee, which would be the three folks on that committee, to just do a pulse check. Wouldn't be a full board meeting, but just do a pulse check. And if there are concerns of the board, they could share those with one of the members of the committee. But that would at least give us kind of almost like a review, would be an idea.
I like that idea, rather than calling the full board together. For the most part, I think that the plan has incorporated all the comments and recommendations we have given the superintendent on previous occasions. I think the last view is just one of making sure that everything is together and says what we wanted to say. So I don't see a need to have a meeting just for that. Mr. Morosky?
I don't necessarily think we need to have a meeting just for that either, but as we learned, and this is no disrespect meant to anybody, the board, administration, otherwise, whatever, But as we learned with the student code of conduct, that took 4 revisions after the final revision. And so I personally I don't necessarily need to come in. I have 2 board meetings on my calendar in July, because I was always under the impression we'd have one if we needed one, so I'm on call. But I'm fine with whatever, but I'm also fine with letting one of the 3 members of the committee know my thoughts on it, because there are some serious fundamental things that I want to see in that plan that are not in it. And I want them to be in it before we give it to the community.
Okay. Ms. Bates, followed by Ms. Bolton.
Yes, and I know that we will have a printed strategic plan to give to the community, but I also understand that this document is a fluid document. It's not something that will be unchanged over the next several years. So there's always opportunity as we implement, or as the administration implements, to make some of the adjustments that need to be made.
I agree. I agree.
But- Okay.
Ms. Bolton, and then back to you, Mr. Moraz.
I think it would make sense if the 3 board members of the committee meet, and I think that date should be kind of published so that any other board member that would like to attend could attend, and that certain things need to be addressed. And, I mean, I have great confidence in the administration finalizing this, putting it together, but I also know that the board is taking seriously this, the title, Our Community Design Strategic Plan. And we've had the community be very much involved, and I think the last final check and the final suggestion, and I think part of the tone probably would have to come from ultimately the board. And so I think we should arrange that time, whether it's 1 meeting in July or 2 meetings of just the 3 and whoever else wanted to attend. But we have to have something with which, to which to react. I agree that it's a fluid document, but I've also heard some administrators and board members say, if we can have an actual plan that keeps us from getting too much into the weeds on every single thing that we do, and let the administration carry out this broad, good plan that would help us keep us focused on big issues and let them get about their work. So I think it's a fluid document, but I also think there are basic principles and tenets to it and targets to it that we don't want to fool around with, or we don't have a plan.
Exactly. Mr. Morosky?
I was going to say, I agree with Ms. Bates that it needs to be malleable, but as I'm fond of saying, it's only possible to be spontaneous when you have a plan. It's only possible to have fun when you have rules. Meaning, this document can't be malleable unless it has some really set things, I think, in stone. So, I mean, that's just kind of where my head is, and I'm going to be a pain about a couple things up until August 9th. Particularly the racial disparity piece, and I want to see that called out in there, and if it's not, I think it's an issue.
Well, I'm going to throw my 2-cent worth in for what it's worth, but I've read the plan as it is, and we'll read this, and I think it's an excellent document, and the plan is supposed to be a guide. All of the things, when we talk about in the weeds, we go so far as that we just pick and pick and pick at the wording and the formatting and all of that, and that's not what it's supposed to do. It's not what it's supposed to do. So I would just say to board members that when you read it and you want to please give feedback to the 3 members, but keep in mind that we asked them to do the plan, and we asked them to cover basic tenets. We wanted to make sure that our priorities were addressed. We wanted to make sure that they got the input from the community and everything. And what it is a guide. The work of this strategic plan follows that. So we have to be very careful not to really dictate look at every single strategy and try to compound that with lots of meaty things that happens in implementation. So that's all I need to say. Ms. Bolton, did you have your hand up? Okay, anybody else? Any comments?
I've got a question.
Yes, Mr. Davis.
So are we approving this tonight
No.
Okay, so I go back to the original question. So when is the board going to approve the
The,
strategic plan?
what I'm hearing is that the three members on the strategic plan will come together to review the total package. If we have comments or questions, give those comments or questions to those members.
So we're
Then we're
approving
going to approve it
when?
on August 7th.
So when is, when,
I got it.
so when is the administration going to print it? On the 8th, and she's going
Oh.
to present it on the 9th?
That's a good question. Superintendent, I'm looking at you. When were you all wanting to have this printed up for?
I'm looking
When will
forward.
it be available for the community?
It just depends on when we have the final edits and we're not making any additional changes to the plan. We would like to have it printed by the August 9th meeting, unveiling of it. I mean, that would be our hope.
Okay, Ms. Bowers?
Is it fair for the committee to meet early in July, and even though we agreed not to have a meeting, then we meet in the latter part of July just to give them a turnaround time for printout?
When you mean me, you mean the
I
whole
mean, the
board?
whole board for approval.
It's Mr. Davis?
I'm pretty confident in the three members that are on the strategic planning committee, and I would offer that we approve the strategic planning. We approve the strategic plan tonight with the caveat that the three board members that are on the strategic plan committee can halt it at some point if other board members have comments. I have to agree with Member Morowski, and I don't think racial disparities is a wording thing. It's more of a directness in regard to what our priorities and what our goals are, what our plan is, and we want to discourage those racial disparities is critical. And I saw several places inside the strategic plan where that would deepen the meaning of our efforts. I mean, I've looked at the strategic plan. We sent it last week or week before, so we had plenty of time to review it. My comments personally would be to join in with Mr. Morowski around racial disparities, and then reading the new wording that the superintendent gave us today. I mean, I don't think I would need it but a couple of days to get my views back to the three members that are leading it.
That would be fine.
All right.
Yeah. Ms. Bolton, I'm sorry, Ms. Bates.
The only problem with that is that we haven't given opportunity for public comment.
To Ms. Bates' point, if we have a time that the three board members are going to get back with the community, that would address that concern, but we could still approve the plan tonight because it would still give those three board members that authority.
Mr. Messer, followed by Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the majority, or at least a majority, and I guess we haven't heard from everybody, but that the three committee members could do, so we could approve as is, with then ensuring that these additional comments are baked in by a meeting with the three. And I think, as Ms. Bolton talked about, we could, of course, open that up to any of the people who've been part of that Strategic Planning Engagement Committee. Frankly, I think the majority of people who would give public input are that group and have been a part of it, so I think we've gotten a ton of that. But I think it would be prudent just to give another, I think it's a great point. So at that meeting, I think we have a section that we just have hearing of the public to say, is there anything that's a glaring miss? But we have that check as a part of that committee meeting.
Okay. So, Ms. Bolton.
I'm not sure what I would be approving. I mean, I don't know which document I'm approving. Am I approving this with the additions in order to be, I'm not sure. So I prefer not to approve it tonight, but, I'm not altogether sure that the entire STEP committee needs to meet, but that we could call a meeting if anybody had public comment about anything. I have a question about just the logistics of the printing. Will we, it would seem to me that there's going to be an executive summary of the plan that could be readily available by the 9th, and then whatever is an electronic version posted maybe on the 9th of the full plan. And then about the printing, what century are we living in that we're, thinking in terms of a printed document? When I came on the board 12 years ago, there was a very large strategic plan on the desk, and it was all printed, and I'm not sure what happened as a result of it. So I think the August 7th is pushing it if we want to have a big document to get to the printer and distributed that day, but certainly the executive summary, certainly electronically it could be posted for access, and then we could be doing the printing, because I think it's going to kind of look cool. I mean, it's obviously we want to make it graphically stunning and interesting, so I think I'd rather not approve tonight, but have the three meet and whoever else is interested, and then make the final approval on the 7th after you all have had an opportunity to react to what the administration's produced from, mid-July to end July or whatever.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we're saying for the most part is that we've given our sort of approval to the superintendent to move forward. So this needs to be incorporated. We need to have a final document that is shared that is presented to the three members and any of the community members who participated on the effort. Make last-minute finishing touches. Board members can offer suggestions and recommendations in preparation of that conversation. And then after that, but the final document, which will be electronic, will be presented to us for approval on August 7th. And thus, it can be ready to present to the public on August 9th. Did I summarize that accurately? Everybody good with that? Okay. Thank you. All righty. Any other questions, comments about the superintendent's report? Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
I'm sorry, I missed who made the original motion on the superintendent's revised recommendations.
I think you did.
I had Ryan as the second.
Oh, I did.
Ms. Bates.
It was so long ago.
I know. I tell you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Mrs. Bates.
Aye.
Ms. Bolton.
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Messer.
Aye.
Mr. Morosky.
Yes.
President Jones.
Aye. Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the revised report of the treasurer?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, discussion. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates.
No on Roman numeral 1 on page 35 under security, and that is to the city of Cincinnati for crossing guards. And no on Roman numeral 9 Community Reinvestment Act agreements.
Roman numeral 9, I'm sorry, repeat that?
Yes,
On the CRAs?
yes.
Yes, okay. Yes on the rest?
With the exception of page 35, the crossing guards.
Thank you.
Yes on all the rest.
Ms. Bolton?
Yes on everything except page 35, under security, the triple, double, quadruple A regarding crossing guards. And also no on page 39, under human resources, the 0000, or no, it's PPPPP, excuse me, Teach for America, and then also on 40, page 40, I should say, under Human Resources, the SSS or so, Teach for America. Everything else, yes.
Mrs. Bowers?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
The City of Cincinnati on the crossing guards, what's the timeline on that? Like, is that for the next school year?
That's correct.
But it says month to month? Does it say month to month?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand that.
And here
I
comes
think
the
Mr.
annual-
Hoying's going to come explain.
Yeah, I believe that refers to the fact that we no longer have a global agreement with them. We formerly entered into a year-long agreement. If you remember, that was not renewed. Since then, the city has continued to provide crossing guards at a status quo, kind of month-to-month basis. So that's what I believe that's referring to. I'm not sure who put month-to-month in, but.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Morosky, followed by Ms. Bolton.
So my only confusion then would be, so if we pay them month to month, we're not paying them
No, that's an
$762,000 a
annual,
month.
that's an annual payment. Again, I think that month-to-month is just referring to the fact that we don't have a year-long contract with them.
We're creating a purchase order to do a blanket.
Okay. Ms. Bolton?
Having passed the resolution previously regarding the negotiations with the city, which listed crossing guards, and I'm somewhat, that's my thinking as to why to not pass this now, or this, make an exception of that one item. My other piece of it is that it's at least possible, and we've been assured by General Counsel some months ago, I believe, that the crossing guards could function under our jurisdiction.
It is legal to do that, yes.
It is legal to do that. So this has been an issue that we have been discussing for a number of months, that we would have that capacity to provide that. And so the other piece of this, of course, is on the crossing guard piece. We've had 15 or 17 of our children hit by cars this past school year. So I think this whole issue needs to be addressed in some way. But that was my reasoning regarding the crossing guards. And thank you for that clarification.
Okay, before we move on with the vote, we have any other questions or comments, Ms. Bates?
Yeah, and I know that there's a discrepancy between what the city believes the cost of, the annual cost for crossing guards is, and what our treasurer believes is the annual cost for crossing guards. And that hasn't been resolved for me.
Okay. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, my final question is, so the city is paying for crossing guards now?
No,
No,
no.
And hasn't been
correct.
for,
Couple years.
What's that? 2000, at least since 2008.
okay, this, you were asking me for my vote. I
Yes.
vote no on page 35. I, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6A.
It's
Six-
the crossing guard contract is what you're voting no on?
Yes, and
Okay.
I vote yes on the rest.
Thank you. Ms. Wagner?
Mr. Messer?
I will ditto Mr. Davis.
Yes on the rest?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's
Mr.
correct.
Morosky?
Yes on everything except
Everything, yes on everything else? And President Jones?
Okay, yes on everything except the security, except the crossing guards.
Thank you.
Okay, wow, we made it through that. That was a tough one. Okay, any inquiries or updates? Hearing none, assignments. Any assignments? Yes, Ms. Bolton.
We had a number of assignments, and everyone needs to help me with that regarding our government liaison and our administration regarding the distressed districts, the writing of the, informing us, the administration has to inform us as to what is the status and then what is in the proposal, I guess pending in the Senate or conference, and then writing a letter on our behalf that we would approve based upon their concerns, and as long as they also build in the idea of loss of local control.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other assignments? Yes, Mr. Morosky.
Back to the Spencer question I had. I don't know if this would be at our board meeting in August, maybe, or at a Student Achievement Committee meeting, probably the board meeting. But just an update on what the plan would be going forward and how we can be helpful in that, because I know there are different options of whether it's expanding on the current property or whether it's looking at other properties to acquire, but that school has just been really great, and I would hate to see it not stay great and grow great. So an update on what the plans are with Spencer in reference to the LSDMC letter that was sent and their laundry list of things that they said they needed, and where that stands. Thanks.
Any other assignments? Mr. Messer.
I would like to assign the administration to enjoy the month of July and take a break and not have any evenings with us and get rested up for another school year.
Thank you. All righty. Having no other business before us, I declare the meeting adjourned.